A country without mountains raised one of the strongest high-altitude climbers of his generation. Samuli Mansikka, a Finn from Helsinki, climbed 10 8,000ers, 8 of them without supplemental oxygen, most of them solo. Kangchenjunga, K2 Makalu. Every ascent in clean style, without high-altitude Sherpas on the route. In the spring of 2015, his 10th mountain became Annapurna, the most dangerous 8,000er on the planet. On the 24th of March, at 2:45 in the afternoon, he stood on the summit. What happened at 7,000 meters a few hours later, nobody ever saw the first movement. The mountain gave back neither body nor answer. Samuli Mansikka was born on the 28th of July, 1978, in Helsinki. Finland is a country of 1,000 lakes and endless forests, a country of northern lights and cold winds. But the main thing it lacks is high mountains. The highest point in the country barely exceeds 1,000 meters, and most Finns never climb above 3,000 in their entire lives. Mansikka grew up in this flat world, among pines, granite cliffs, and the bays of the Baltic. And from his youth, he was drawn to where the air grows thin and the horizon breaks off into the sky. His path into real mountaineering didn't start in alpine schools or sports clubs. There are practically none of those in Finland in the usual sense. He came to the mountains through trekking, through working with expeditions in the Himalayas. There, on the trails beneath the giants, he learned to read the weather, calculate acclimatization, and survive at altitude. He became a guide, then an expedition leader. Later, his colleagues chose him as president of the Finnish Alpine Club, the national organization uniting everyone in this flat country who takes mountains seriously. He was admitted to the Explorers Club, the international community of travelers and researchers. Mansikka spent most of the year outside Finland. His route repeated season after season: Helsinki, Kathmandu, base camp, summit, the way back. Nepal became his second home, and the Himalayas his actual workplace. People who worked alongside him described him the same way: quiet, calm, methodical, without extra words. He didn't resemble the loud stars of mountaineering with their press conferences and sponsorship contracts plastered all over their helmets. Foreign partners soon gave him a nickname that stuck with him for life: the Fearless Finn. It described very precisely what his climbs would later show. Fearless or not, any Finn who grew up on the plains first has to test how his body handles thin air. And Mansikka took that test in 2006 on a mountain that many high-altitude climbers consider a training 8,000er, Cho Oyu in Tibet, 8,188 meters above sea level. A normal route, climbed each season by dozens of expeditions. But for a newcomer to big altitude, those 8,000 are no formality at all. Here it's decided whether you can even function in a zone where the air holds a third of the usual oxygen. Mansikka climbed Cho Oyu without supplemental oxygen. For a first 8,000er, that's a strong step. He passed the test and got his answer. His body worked up there. Lungs, heart, head, all handled the load. That opened a door for him that many would like to open, but few managed to. In 2008, he returned to the Himalayas with a different level of ambition. His target was Lhasa, 8,516 meters, the fourth highest mountain on the planet. He took the normal route and, for the only time early in his career, used supplemental oxygen, a reasonable choice for a young climber on the world's fourth 8,000er. But for Mansikka, this experience became more of a lesson than a standard. That same season, he went back to Cho Oyu. And this time, he did it without oxygen, confirming for himself what he had felt 2 years earlier. From these two ascents, Cho Oyu without oxygen, Lhotse with oxygen, Cho Oyu again without oxygen, his main principle was born. He called it by the English phrase accepted in the climbing community: fair means, honest style. A climb counts as real only if it goes without supplemental oxygen and without high-altitude Sherpa partners on the actual route. A few years later, this principle would become his personal law and almost entirely shape his fate. A personal law isn't born in a single day. In 2009, Mansikka took a step that from the outside looked like a contradiction of everything he would later defend. He went to Everest, 8,848 meters, the southeast ridge, the classic route, supplemental oxygen. That was the second and last time he used oxygen in his career. Classical Everest with oxygen was, at that moment, standard expedition practice. Mansikka went through it and checked the box. That same season he tried Lhotse for the second time, now planning to do it differently. But at about 7,950 meters, he turned back. Not every attempt ends on the summit, and he accepted that calmly, without loud statements. But the main climb of 2009 was neither Everest nor Lhotse. The real turning point came on Manaslu, 8,163 meters, the 8th highest mountain in the world, often covered by snowfalls and avalanches. Mansikka went to Manaslu alone, solo, without supplemental oxygen. This wasn't a warm-up, not an experiment, not an attempt at originality. It was a new working format he consciously switched to. From Manaslu in 2009, a line can be drawn through the rest of Mansikka's career. From that moment on, solo and no oxygen became his standard. Not a pretty line in his biography, but a climbing technology. He went alone. He didn't use supplemental oxygen. He relied on his own acclimatization, his own body, his own head. For him, Everest with oxygen was a phase that had been lived through, and a starting point, not a reference point. The reference was now ahead, in harder mountains, in stylistically clean ascents. The Finn who had just stood on Everest decided that the real work begins here, not where it's shown on television. And this resolve defined the entire next decade of his life. The next decade began with a switch of region. In 2010, Mansikka went to Pakistan, to the Karakoram, a mountain system that is considered technically and climatically harsher than the Nepalese Himalayas. Commercial expeditions work here less often, the weather is tougher, the logistics more complex, and the approach to base camps longer. His target was Gasherbrum 2, 8,035 meters. He went by the normal route and again without oxygen. The Karakoram frightens many precisely by its unpredictability. Good weather windows are shorter, snowstorms come faster, and up high there's nothing to wait them out in. But the Finn felt comfortable in that atmosphere. He had grown up in a climate where cold and wind are every day. On Gasherbrum 2, he confirmed that his formula worked not only in Nepal. In 2011, Mansikka returned to Nepal and took Dhaulagiri, 8,167 meters, the 7th highest mountain in the world. It's known for difficult weather and strong winds on the upper part of the route. On Dhaulagiri, he again went solo, again without oxygen. By now, this wasn't an exception, but a working mode. The formula repeated: one person, his own acclimatization, his own pace, no support on the route. In 2012, he went to Tibet, to Shishapangma, 8,027 meters. The only 8,000 are located entirely in China. An ambiguous day awaited him here. He climbed to around 8,000, but poor visibility raised the question that many high-altitude climbers would later argue about. Did he reach the main summit or stop on the forward one, the so-called central summit? Data from this climb remains contradictory. Mansikka himself treated it cautiously. He didn't trumpet it as a success, but he didn't cross it off entirely either. This episode showed his main quality. He treated facts honestly even when honesty worked against his own statistics. Honesty about facts is complemented by honesty about style. And in the spring of 2013, both lines converged on one mountain. Mansikka arrived beneath Makalu, the 5th highest mountain on the planet, 8,485 meters, whose silhouette many consider the most beautiful in the Himalayas. Makalu is called one of the most technically difficult of the 8,000ers. There are fewer commercial expeditions here, fewer chances to use other people's ropes, and fewer people around. He chose the northwest face, one of the most demanding variants of the climb. No compromises on style. Solo, without supplemental oxygen, without a high-altitude Sherpa partner on the actual route. On the 22nd of May, 2013, Samuli Mansikka stood on the summit of Makalu. In the 2013 season, there were very few successful climbers on Makalu. Weather windows were short. The snowpack changed from season to season. The Finn made it onto that narrow list. And he did it his way, quietly. He didn't build a loud PR campaign around the climb. He didn't publish a series of pieces with grandiose wording. In interviews and posts, he kept talking about the mountain, not about himself. For him, Makalu was Makalu. He described the route, the weather, the decisions. Himself he left in the background. Makalu definitively cemented Mansikka's status as a Finn of world level among high-altitude climbers. At that point, he was one of the strongest specialists in his country when it came to working in the death zone, the zone above 8,000 meters. Many of his countrymen did mountaineering on a European scale, climbing in the Alps and in the Scandinavian hills. But in the real top tier, where we're talking about solo climbs on 8,000ers without oxygen, the Finns could be counted on one hand. It was precisely after Makalu that he began planning the most ambitious climbs of his career, the ones people would later recall in conversations about him. And first on that list was Kangchenjunga. Kangchenjunga, in the mountaineering community, is called the third highest peak in the world, 8,586 meters. In altitude, it yields only to Everest and K2, but by character, it's closer to the second. It's a huge massif with 5 summits, located on the border of Nepal and India. A climb of it has always been an event. For Finnish mountaineering, a rare event indeed. In 2014, Mansikka set his sights on Kangchenjunga. His initial plan was ambitious: the northwest face. It's not a classical line, it's a harder and less traveled route. Passing it solo and without oxygen would have meant stepping onto a completely different level, even by the standards of his own career. But mountains don't always agree with plans, and more often than not, it isn't the weather that disagrees, it's the logistics. Permits, approach support, deadlines, base camps. Everything fell together differently than he had calculated. At some point, Mansikka made a sober decision. He changed the route. Instead of the northwest face, he registered for the southwest face, the classical climbing line. Still a serious route, but a more predictable one. The main thing was that the principle remained untouched. Solo, no oxygen, no high-altitude Sherpa partner on the route. On the 18th of May, 2014, at 8:30 in the morning, Samuli Mansikka stepped onto the summit of Kangchenjunga. He descended on his own, without incident, returned to base camp, and from there to Kathmandu. On his notional scoreboard of 8,000ers, there were now 8 check marks. Kangchenjunga became one of the main climbs of his career. For a Finn to pass it in that style was a result few people in his country could point to in relation to themselves. But Mansikka remained in character here too. No loud statements, no race for titles. He was already looking toward Pakistan, because his summer of 2014 was scheduled for another route, one that was impossible to walk past in his case. In the summer of 2014, Mansikka flew to Pakistan. His target was 8,611 meters, the second highest mountain on the planet and, in the common opinion of climbers, the hardest of all 8,000ers. It's called the Mountaineers' Mountain, the harshest mountain, the mountain that doesn't forgive mistakes. The mortality statistics on K2 are substantially higher than on Everest. It changes the character of every season. Before heading up the mountain, Mansikka gave a short interview to the publication Altitude Pakistan. His line in it is very characteristic of him. He said calmly, "On K2, this summer there may be many summits or there may be none. That's the magic of K2. No bravado, no rewards announced in advance. Just a statement of the mountain's character." He took the normal route, the Abruzzi line, the classical variant of the climb, but again in his own way, alone, without oxygen, without a high-altitude Sherpa partner on the route. The Finn once again did what for any other country would long since have been an event of the first magnitude. The 2014 season on K2 went successfully for part of the expeditions, unlike many other years when the mountain simply lets no one through. Mansikka caught his window and went to the summit of K2. That was his 9th 8,000er. On the list of Finns who have climbed that mountain, there have always been few names, and work in his style made the list shorter still. At that point, Samuli Mansikka was one of the most decorated high-altitude climbers in his country's history. 7 of 9 8,000ers had been climbed without supplemental oxygen, a significant part of them solo. But he didn't speak about a project of the 14 peaks, and didn't turn his career into a race for a collector's record. He discussed the next mountain, the next season, the next decision. 14 was a number voiced by others. He preferred to talk about what actually stood before him. In the spring of 2015, what stood before him was Annapurna. Annapurna has a reputation among climbers that they pronounce without a smile. It's the most dangerous of the 14 8,000ers on the planet. Mortality statistics on its climbs reach up to a third. Roughly every third person who went up didn't come back. Avalanches, collapses, steep snow slopes, unpredictable weather. All of that is its standard set. In March of 2015, Mansikka arrived beneath Annapurna 1 in Nepal, 8,091 meters. He went by the so-called French route, the classical northern climbing line, on which in 1950 the expedition of Maurice Herzog first climbed an 8,000er. The route is well known, but its dangers are well known too. Formally, Mansikka worked within the framework of an expedition from the company Dreamer's destination. He was brought into the group by permit, the climbing authorization. But the agreement was clear and simple. The company supported him only at base camp. Logistics, accommodation, food, communication down below. On the mountain itself, he was an independent solo climber, without an assigned high-altitude Sherpa partner. This would later be confirmed by the expedition's guide, Mingma Gyalje Sherpa. His words sounded like this: he went without Sherpa partner support. The agreement was only for base camp. That means Mansikka went on to Annapurna by his usual rules, alone on the route, without supplemental oxygen, without high-altitude support. This time there was a large commercial team around him with Sherpas and clients, but that was their story. His was next to it, but separate. Annapurna was to become his 10th 8,000er in 9 years. For a person who had started in 2006 on Cho Oyu, that's a very dense schedule, especially given the style he worked in. 10 mountains in 9 years, 8 of them without oxygen, most of them solo. On the 24th of March, 2015, the team climbed to the final camp and prepared for the summit push. The day for the summit was chosen. The weather window, by common opinion, looked favorable. On the evening of the 23rd of March, he wrote short messages to base camp. His day would begin in the dark. The morning of the 24th of March, 2015, a Tuesday. On Annapurna, by that mountain's standards, it was a good day. Restrained wind, decent visibility, temperatures within expected range. On that day, success came not only to Mansikka. In total, 13 people from different teams reached the summit of Annapurna. By that mountain's standards, a noticeable result. Samuli Mansikka went on to the summit around 2:45 in the afternoon local time, 3 hours to the beginning of twilight, a long descent ahead. Next to him on the summit was Pemba Sherpa, 35 years old, an experienced high-altitude climber from the Makalu region, a village in the Sankuasaba area. In the community, he was known by the nickname Technical Pemba for his ability to work on difficult sections. He was climbing that day as part of the commercial team. Mansikka by character doesn't linger at altitude. He had gone through this procedure many times, a couple of minutes, a few frames, a gear check, and down. He knew how the body works at 8,000. The longer you stay there, the less resource you have left. He checked the box on his 10th 8,000er and began the descent. According to team members, Mansikka went down ahead of the main group. That's not a violation. Everyone on the mountain descends at his own pace, and a solo climber all the more so. After some time, Pemba Sherpa also went down and gradually caught up with him. 2 people walking the same route, but independently of each other. Was there a rope connection between them at that moment? The first reports allowed for yes. Such an assumption looked logical, given that they were later found together. But the Finnish magazine Retki came out with a clarification in its materials. There was no rope between them. They were walking separately, simply close, within sight of each other. This detail will become important, because after some time, Mansikka and Pemba would end up at one point not by arrangement, but by coincidence of slope, gravity, and one shared fall. For now, they were still walking. The altitude was dropping. The descent stretched on as long as the climb. Altitude around 7,000 meters. The descent section of Annapurna's northern slope. A field of snow and ice with an incline that requires careful work with crampons and ice axe. Witnesses from the team were higher up on the slope and saw 2 figures below them, Mansikka and Pemba Sherpa. At some moment, they slipped and fell. It wasn't an avalanche, not a serac collapse, not a fall into a crevasse. It was a slip on the descent, a classic scenario of high-altitude mountaineering. At 7,000 meters, after summiting an 8,000er, a person's reaction is slowed, muscles work at the limit, technique suffers, attention scatters. After the summit, many experienced high-altitude climbers speak of the same feeling. The descent demands more control than the ascent, precisely because the body has already spent its resource. In those conditions, very little is enough. A crampon slipped on a hard patch. The ice axe failed. A second's fatigue took over. A foot placed just slightly in the wrong spot. That's enough to start moving downward and lose the ability to stop. On a steep snow-ice slope, self-arrest at such altitude is a matter of milliseconds. Mansikka and Pemba slid. There was no rope between them, but their trajectories crossed or coincided. They moved down the slope. Witnesses from above saw the fall, but could do nothing to help. At such altitude, rescue action requires a prepared team, time, and a completely different situation. Whether the fall was simultaneous or with a small time gap, data from different sources diverge. In different publications, the descriptions differ slightly. The exact mechanism of the slip can't be reconstructed. None of the witnesses was close enough to see the first movement. That day, no one saw Samuli Mansikka or Pemba Sherpa alive again. The rest of the team continued the descent. The radio window expected at base camp didn't close with a confirmation. Night came quickly on the mountain. News that 2 people hadn't returned began to spread across the radio stations of different expeditions. The news required confirmation. It came the morning of the next day, Wednesday, the 25th of March, 2015. Other team members continued the descent along the same route they had walked the day before. They approached the section where they had last seen the 2 figures the previous day and looked further down the slope. At an altitude of about 6,700 meters, they noticed 2 motionless figures. These were Samuli Mansikka and Pemba Sherpa. Both had died as a result of the fall. The elevation difference between the place where the slip occurred and the place where the slope stopped them was about 300 meters vertical. For such sections of Annapurna's northern slope, that's a typical distance. A smooth snow-ice descent carries a body fast and far. The Ministry of Tourism of Nepal, in official statements, would later give the altitude of the bodies as approximately 7,000 meters. The team's data, which speaks of 6,700 meters, and the ministry's data diverge by 300 meters. This difference remained unresolved. The point on the map where they were found is recorded differently in different sources. The data is contradictory, and neither side provided coordinates that would close the question. The team continued the descent. The bodies remained on the slope. Lifting them from there down in that spot is physically impossible without a separate operation. The news went out on air that same day. Nepalese and international mountaineering outlets were the first to record the incident. Yle, Finland's public broadcaster, reported the death of its countrymen. Fox News, Rock and Ice, Gript, Explorer's Web, Business Standard published short pieces about what had happened on Annapurna. For Finland, the news was one of the hardest in its high-altitude mountaineering for years. Samuli Mansikka was the sitting president of the Finnish Alpine Club, a public figure in his niche, a man known to everyone in this small country who did big mountains. In Helsinki, the word came in spring against the backdrop of the melting snow of the plains to which he would never return. In the mountaineering community, news of that kind does not go unanswered. Phil Crampton, the British leader of the expedition team, Altitude Junkies, and Mansikka's longtime friend, took responsibility for the body recovery attempt. They had shared seasons behind them and many common base camps. For Crampton, this was not just a work task, but a personal obligation. The operation was scheduled for the 28th of March, 2015, 4 days after the tragedy, a span in which much changes at such altitude. The weather on Annapurna's descent slope remained unstable. High avalanche danger persisted. The very section where the slip occurred posed a threat to those who would try to approach it. Annapurna behaves according to character at such moments. It doesn't give the fallen back easily. Any approach to the bodies at 6,700 meters requires passing along the line where 2 people had already fallen. For rescuers, that's a direct risk of repeating their fate. The decision had to be made quickly and soberly. The risk was judged too high. The operation was canceled. This decision wasn't a refusal of the attempt, but a choice in favor of the living. In high-altitude mountaineering, there's an unwritten rule. To bring back a body at the cost of another life is not an option. From that moment to this day, the bodies of Samuli Mansikka and Pemba Sherpa have not been evacuated from Annapurna. They remain where the slope stopped them. The mountain keeps them for itself, as it does with many climbers before them. For relatives in Finland and for Pemba Sherpa's family in the village beneath Makalu, This means the impossibility of a standard farewell. No body, no familiar ritual, no place at a cemetery one can come to on a clear day. Their place of memory is now a single one, the northern slope at 8,000 meters, reachable by very few. It's precisely this that makes Mansikka's story what it is. The mountains didn't give his body back, and this, as is often the case with 8,000ers, can no longer be fixed. Samuli Mansikka died at 36. Behind him, he left 10 8,000ers. Out of the 14 in existence, 8 of those 10 were climbed without supplemental oxygen, most of them solo, that is, with one person on the route, without high-altitude Sherpa partners. Such statistics for a Finn are absolutely not average. These are statistics at the level of a very narrow club of climbers worldwide. The response from the mountaineering community did not take long. His friend, the American high-altitude climber and commentator Alan Arnett, wrote a personal essay, Death of My Friend. British mountaineer and writer Mark Horrell published a piece with the headline, Farewell Samuli Mansikka, the Fearless Finn. Both texts were not boilerplate obituaries, but texts by people who had known him personally and worked alongside him. The Altitude Junkies team, led by Phil Crampton, established an award in Mansikka's name, the Samuli Mansikka Alpinist Award. It's given to mountaineers who climb in his style, without supplemental oxygen, without high-altitude Sherpa partners on the route. In that very fair means he defended throughout his career. The award became a way to fix in the community what he had chosen personally. In Finland, his name remains in the history of the Finnish Alpine Club. He was its president, and for a country small by mountaineering standards, that's not a formal post. His climbs, Makalu Solo, Kangchenjunga Solo, K2 Solo, remain reference points for the next generations of Finnish high-altitude climbers. Annapurna is still considered the most dangerous 8,000er on the planet. Its mortality statistics don't change because of what specifically happened in March 2015 on the northern slope. The question of what exactly happened in those seconds at 7,000 meters remains without a precise answer. No one saw the first movement. No one knows what failed: a foot, a crampon, or a second's loss of concentration. The mountain returned neither body nor answer. It left only silence on the slope he chose himself, and this silence is the first of 3 the story will turn to next. On the 24th of March, 2015, at an altitude of around 6,000 meters in the Andes, one man's radio goes silent. Down below, at base camp, a small group remains waiting. Up above stays an Indian who, in just 172 days, crossed all 7 continents, climbed the 5 highest mountains on the planet, and became a national legend of his country. His name is Malli Mastan Babu. He went up alone to check the route for his teammates. His last words over the radio are a plain, businesslike report. The weather is turning, I'm starting the descent. For 9 days, the whole country will wait for news from Tres Cruces Sur. This is the story of what this mountain cost. In September of 1974, in a small village called Gandhijana Sangam in the south of the Indian state of Andhra Pradesh, a boy is born into a family of ordinary farmers. They name him Malli Mastan Babu. Nellore district is a place where most families live off whatever the land gives them, plus the occasional odd job in town. The father, Malli Mastanaya, and the mother, Subama, are raising 5 children. Malli is the youngest. None of the older siblings went through real schooling. He becomes the first in the family to receive a formal education, and that alone sets off a chain of decisions that shapes the rest of his life. In the mid-80s, he is sent to Sainik School in Korukonda, a military school. This is no ordinary school. Here they teach discipline, endurance, order, and self-reliance. Here, boys are shaped into officers, engineers, and athletes. On the ground stands a monument to one of its graduates, Lieutenant M. Uday Bhaskar Rao. The lieutenant died in the mountains during an Indian Army expedition to Everest. The very mountain that people in Andhra Pradesh only knew from pictures. Little Malli walks past that statue every day. At first, it's just a figure everyone salutes. Then it becomes a question. Who was he? Where did he go? What was he looking for up there? For a boy from a village where the tallest point is the roof of the temple, the very idea of a summit higher than 8,000 meters seems almost unreal. And yet, it's right here, in the hallways of a military school, that a simple idea takes root in him. Life can be lived differently. You don't have to stay in your own village. You don't have to choose what all the other kids chose. You can go where statues get built because you were the real thing. Out of this idea, decades later, one of the loudest names in Indian mountaineering will grow. When you come from a poor Indian village, your only social elevator is an engineering degree. Malli understands this very early. After military school, he walks the classic path of the best Indian teenagers of his generation. First, the National Institute of Technology in Jamshedpur. In 1996, he earns his bachelor's degree there in electrical engineering. For the family back in Gandhi Jana Sangam, this alone is an event on the level of a celebration. But it's not enough for him. 2 years later, in 1998, he defends a master's degree in electronics at the Indian Institute of Technology in Kharagpur. IIT is one of the strongest academic institutions in the country. To get in from a village school is nearly impossible. To graduate from it means your future is secure for years ahead. The next step is also standard. For 3 years, Malli works as a software engineer at Satyam Computers. Back then, it's one of the largest IT companies in India. White shirt, air-conditioned office, steady paycheck, a clear career ladder. For the first time, his parents back in the village can sleep peacefully. Their son is set. Inside, something else is going on. He catches himself thinking that he's sitting in the wrong life. He plans vacations in mountain regions. He reads about expeditions. He notices that his most alive emotions show up somewhere other than the office. He makes a decision that looks insane to everyone around him. Malli enrolls at the Indian Institute of Management in Calcutta, IIM Calcutta. It's one of the 3 most prestigious business schools in the country. In 2004, he completes the MBA program. But inside IIM itself, he does something nobody there had done before him. In 2003, he founds the Adventure Club, the first student adventure club in the institute's history. The club does rock climbing, trekking, and skiing. Formally, it's a hobby. In practice, it's a training ground for a man who already knows where he'll go once the diploma is in hand. After graduating from IIM Calcutta, every student has a predictable script in front of him. The placement procedure is built right into the program. Companies come straight to campus, line up, and offer top positions in banks, consulting firms, investment funds. Malli's classmates, one after another, sign contracts with six-figure dollar salaries. For India in the early 2000s, that was nearly outer space. Malli pointedly refuses the entire procedure. He doesn't sign contracts, doesn't show up for interviews, doesn't negotiate start dates. He simply walks out of the IIM Calcutta campus and leaves for the mountains. For Indian society, a move like this is almost a scandal. The family back in the village doesn't understand. Relatives think it's a whim that will pass. It doesn't pass. He has almost no sponsors, no major brand contracts, no stable paycheck. He lives very modestly, spending his money on tickets, gear, and permits. He trains himself. He finds climbing partners through forums and clubs. He carefully saves every rupee for the next expedition. To finance his own climbs at least somehow, he starts leading groups through the Himalayas. He gets recommended. On those treks, he shows the same qualities that set him apart at IIM: quiet leadership, the ability to plan, the capacity to hold a group together in tough conditions. He rarely raises his voice. He makes decisions fast. In emergencies, he stays calm. At the same time, he's developing a large personal project. The idea is simple: climb all 7 summits, the highest points of the 7 continents: Vinson in Antarctica, Aconcagua in South America, Denali in North America, Kilimanjaro in Africa, Elbrus in Europe, Kosciuszko in Australia, and Everest in Asia. But not just climb them faster than anyone had ever done it before. He knows age isn't on his side, and he doesn't have a huge budget. What he has is an engineer's mind and the discipline of a military school. That has to be enough. Discipline and an engineer's mind really do work. On the 19th of January 2006, Malli Mastan Babu stands on the summit of Mount Vinson in Antarctica, 4,892 meters. He becomes the first Indian to reach the highest point of the continent. The season in Antarctica is short. Weather windows are rare. He catches the very first one. After that begins a tight schedule that looks like a train timetable. In March of the same year, he climbs Kilimanjaro, Africa's highest point, 5,895 meters. In April, Australia's Kosciuszko, the lowest of the seven, just 2,228 meters. It's the only summit where the main challenge is logistics rather than altitude. Malli uses it as a decompression and travel point. In May, Everest's turn comes. 8,848 meters, the highest point of Asia, the most physically brutal part of the program. He goes up the standard route from the south. After returning, he barely rests. By June, he's already on Elbrus, Europe's highest point, 5,642 meters. The Caucasus feels mild after the Himalayas, but there's no week for recovery. In July, Denali in Alaska, the highest point of North America, 6,190 meters, a cold, windy, technically demanding mountain. On the 10th of July, 2006, Malli closes out the full list of 7 summits. From the first summit to the last, 172 days pass. It's a world record. Before Malli, no one had ever done the Classic 7 in such a short time. What matters even more is something else. He becomes the first person from South Asia to complete the Classic 7 summits list at all. Not just faster, but the first. For India, this immediately shifts the scale of the conversation. A former Satyam computers engineer, a boy from the village of Gandhijana Sangam, in a single season rewrites the record book and puts the country on the map of high-altitude mountaineering. For a country where the main sporting religion is cricket, it's an almost impossible story. Inside this loud achievement, Malli has quietly set up a second one, completely different in character. In the early days, almost no one knows about it. It only becomes visible when journalists start checking the dates of his ascents. It turns out, Malli climbed each of the 7 summits on a different day of the week. Monday, one mountain, Tuesday, another, and so on across all 7. Such a coincidence can't happen by chance. In the world of big mountains, you obey weather windows, available helicopter slots, Sherpa schedules, the state of the route. If the weather gives you one shot on Tuesday, you can't wait until Thursday, which means Malli had adjusted his flight dates, start dates, and the entire attack calendar in advance, so that at every single one of the 7 points he'd land on the exact day of the week he wanted. To pull that off, you need a level of planning closer to a major corporate logistics operation than to a private expedition. This is where Malli's second profession comes through. The engineer from IIT and the manager from IIM Calcutta does what he does best. He builds a complex table of variables and finds the one solution where every checkbox lines up. But Malli has yet another extra plan. On the 28th of October, 2006, he climbs Karsten's Pyramid in Oceania, 4,884 meters. It's the 4th most significant peak in the alternative, stricter version of the 7 summits under Messner's classification. In the standard BAS list, Kosciuszko counts as the highest point of Australia and Oceania. In Messner's list, that slot goes to Karsten's Pyramid, a technically far more serious mountain. On the 28th of October, Malli also closes this extended version. It turns out that in 281 days, he completes both versions of the 7 summits, BAS and Messner. In the mountaineering world, such a double is a rare event. The record Malli set inside the 7, the days of the week, has not been broken to this day. None of the many fast 7 summiters of the years that followed has managed to repeat that kind of jeweler's precision. Jeweler's precision with dates could have been the start of a commercial career. Many people, after the 7 summits, move into guiding, lecture tours, contracts with travel companies. A perfectly logical path. Malli picks a different direction. After 2006, he doesn't turn into a media figure. He goes back to the Himalayas and sets a course for long, self-supported projects that almost no one in the big industry notices. In 2008, he completes one of the most unusual Himalayan treks of his time. 75 days straight, he walks from the Everest region to the Kanchenjunga region. Along the way, he crosses every high pass between the 2 massifs. The total length of the route is around 1,100 kilometers. It's not one summit, it's a traverse of an entire slice of the Himalayas. Conditions: nights at altitude, near total self-sufficiency, frequent bad weather, minimal safety points. Projects like these don't make the front pages. They get written about only in specialist mountaineering journals, but they're precisely what shifts his relationship with the mountains. Malli speaks less and less about records, and more about endurance, about long crossings, about time spent at altitude with no connection to the outside world. In parallel, he closes a project whose level is even higher than the 7 summits. Over the years, he climbs the 5 highest mountains on the planet. Everest, 8,848 meters. K2, 8,611 meters. Kanchenjunga, 8,586 meters. Lhotse, 8,516 meters. Makalu, 8,485 meters. All 5 peaks are above 8,400 meters. This is a narrow club of people in the history of world mountaineering. Even many professionals building careers at altitude aren't part of it. For an Indian climber with no permanent sponsor, such a list is a feat of its own, K2 especially. The second mountain on the planet is considered technically harder than Everest, and the chances of dying on it are higher. Malli climbs it in a style you'd now call old school. No noise, no press releases, no live broadcasts. He just went and did it. By the end of the 2010s, Malli Mastan Babu turns into a living national legend for India. He gets invited regularly to schools, colleges, and military academies. He speaks in front of teenagers and students, and he doesn't talk about the beauty of the mountains. He talks about something else, about discipline, about planning, about how to work with risk when nobody is coming to help you. He keeps repeating one simple idea. A mountain isn't a competition with nature, it's a competition with the version of yourself from yesterday. Every decision on the route has to be rational, not heroic. Every record he ever set is built not on bravery, but on an Excel spreadsheet and cold calculation. Coming from a man who walked 1,500 kilometers alone through the Himalayas, this formula sounds strange, but it's precisely that soberness that makes him an authority in the Indian community. Life outside of expeditions is demonstratively modest. No big contracts with global brands, no agency of his own, not even a steady salary. He earns his living through lectures, occasional sponsorship deals, and work with commercial groups. He lives in small apartments, dresses simply, and almost never gives glossy magazine interviews. At the same time, a strange gap is growing inside Indian society. Here is a man with world records, the first South Asian on the 7 summits, a climber on 5 of the highest 8,000ers. And yet, a state honor at the level of the Padma is never awarded to him. Later, after his death, this will become the subject of a separate article in Outlook India magazine and a debate in the state parliament. Within the professional community, he is respected for his clean style. He almost never uses oxygen where he can do without it. He prefers self-sufficient rope teams or solo climbs over big commercial caravans. He doesn't leave trash on the route. By the mid-2010s, Malli already has a name, a reputation, and his own mountaineering philosophy. But he has almost no armor. He's wired like an athlete living from project to project. By 2015, Malli Mastan Babu sets himself a new major goal. This time, he leaves the familiar Himalayas and heads to the opposite side of the planet, to the Andes. The idea is simple in form and very tough in substance. He wants to climb the 10 highest peaks of the Andean system. The Andes are the second highest mountain system on Earth. The truly serious peaks in it are far more numerous than people tend to think. The highest point, Aconcagua, rises almost to 7,000 meters. Then comes a long line of 6,000ers, each of which can throw its own set of problems at you. The climate here differs from the Himalayan one. The air is drier, the winds are stronger and steadier, bad weather comes in faster, and doesn't leave as quickly as you'd hope. Malli assembles this list methodically. Some peaks he climbs with partners, others solo. He spends many months in South America, returning to India only between expeditions. His calendar has fewer and fewer loud events and more simple working climbs. He's deliberately stepping away from the spotlight. By March of 2015, most of the peaks on his own list of 10 are closed. The remaining points are the final touches. One of them is Tres Cruces Sur. It's the 3 Crosses Massif, sitting on the border of Argentina and Chile, roughly at the latitude of the Atacama Desert. The southern summit of the Massif, Tres Cruces Sur, rises to about 6,748 meters. In the world list of Andean 6,000ers, it's in the top 10. According to plan, Malli intends to close this mountain and return to India by the end of March. He's already telling his friends that he'll spend the next month at home. Relatives are waiting in Gandhijana Sangam. Meetings and lectures are scheduled in Calcutta and Nellore. Cruces is the last major point before rest. Only a few days of approach marches separate him from it. At the same time, an abnormal weather system is already forming at the high southern latitudes of South America, one that will enter the regional history books under its own name. Malli comes under Cruces as part of a small international group. The rope team includes several people of different experience levels. Among them is the Argentine climber Hernan Augusto Parajon, an experienced climber who knows the local routes well. It's with him that Malli keeps the main line of communication during the climb. The team is put together not as a big commercial expedition, but as a compact working group aimed at a specific goal. By the morning of the 23rd of March, 2015, the situation in the area changes. Cloud cover rolls over the massif. The wind picks up. The barometer drops. By signs an experienced man reads without instruments, the weather over the next 24 hours is going to get worse. In cases like this, in the Andes, there are usually two scenarios: a fast push through the remaining window, or a retreat to base camp and waiting it out. Malli chooses an in-between option, one that's very much in his style. He advises his companions to stay at base camp. The risk is high. There's no sense in the group going up right now. At the same time, he himself doesn't drop the idea of working with the mountain that day. He decides to go up higher alone, to check the state of the route, scout the snow cover, clarify the path of the climb, and the possible summit push. The logic is simple. If the weather really does turn bad for a long time, the team will have very little time. The one who went up ahead and understands the route gives everyone else a head start of several hours. A decision like this is standard for an experienced climber. Take on extra risk yourself in order to lower the risk for the others. The group stays below. At camp, they run through the standard routines. They wait for radio check-ins, watch the weather, sort through supplies. Every few hours, they make contact with Malli over the radio. The connection is stable, but getting shorter and shorter. Malli is focused. He needs to quickly assess the state of the slopes and come back. Nobody at this point assumes that the 23rd of March is the last calm day of the whole expedition. All the approaches to the massif are still open. The roads in the foothills are working. Forecasts say the weather should even out within 24 hours. 24 hours isn't enough. On the 24th, Malli calls Parajon again. From indirect data later reconstructed by the search teams, by this point he has climbed to an altitude of around 6,000 meters. Exactly where he is and whether he's going to push for the summit remains a separate question with no final answer. According to one version, he has already reached the highest point of Cruces and is starting his descent. According to another, he didn't reach the summit and is turning back because of worsening conditions. In the last radio contact, Malli says one short phrase to Parajon. The weather is turning fast. He'll start his descent and try to be back at camp by evening. The voice is calm, businesslike, no panic, an ordinary work report. After that, the radio goes dead. For the first few hours at camp, they treat it as a technical issue. At that altitude, radios often glitch from the cold, and batteries drain faster. A few hours later, it becomes clear that it isn't the hardware. A full-blown snowstorm slams into the massif. The wind rises to gale force. Snow comes down like a wall. Temperature drops. Visibility shrinks to a few meters. In weather like that, at 6,000 meters, even an experienced climber turns into a lone dot inside the white noise. Within a day, it becomes clear that this weather system is covering not just the Three Crosses Massif. Heavy rain pounds northern Chile. The dry Atacama Desert gets a month's worth of precipitation in a few hours. In the mountains, it's snow. In the foothills, it's water. Flooding starts. Mudslides come down the slopes. This episode will go into local chronicles as one of the worst meteorological events the region has seen in decades. Somewhere in the middle of this storm, at an unknown point on the massif, one man remains. He has a supply of gear, a tent, experience on 5 8,000ers, and a world record behind him. But the radio is silent. The distance between him and base camp is no longer measured in kilometers, but in a wall of snow no one can push through. At base camp, they wait hour after hour. The first night passes with no contact. By the morning of the 25th of March, it's clear. By normal means, there's no way to get to Malli. The wind is still at storm levels, visibility minimal. The rescue team can't move up to the massif right away. Going up by hand would mean risking the lives of the entire group in an open blizzard. The problem gets worse from below. The access roads to the Cruces area are partially washed out by mudslides. Landslides block the narrow switchbacks. Small settlements in the foothills are cut off from the outside world. Helicopters from Chilean and Argentine-based airfields can't lift off because of the weather. The massif effectively becomes an isolated fortress for several days. Hernan Parajon takes over coordination of the operation. From the 25th of March on, he's responsible for everything: communication with the family, negotiations with rescue services of both countries, planning the flights, consulting with meteorologists. A heavy load rests on him. The very man he heard on the radio only a day ago is now dependent on every decision he makes. The news reaches India already on the 25th of March. The first to publish it are the news agencies. By morning, the main Indian channels carry a breaking line. Malli Mastan Babu has gone missing in the Andes. For the country, this isn't a name from a news column. This is a man people recognize by face, a man they've shown documentaries about, a man talked about in schools and military academies. The country's top record holder, the first South Asian on the 7 summits, a climber who went up 5 of the highest 8,000ers. His friends in India launch an emergency fundraiser. A rescue operation in the Andes is expensive. An hour of helicopter flight at those altitudes is a separate bill: instruments, fuel, insurance for the crews. Some of the money is raised within a day, some collected through personal networks. The Indian Embassy in Santiago joins the effort, coordinating with the Chilean Foreign Ministry and the provincial authorities of Argentina. What begins is what will later be called one of the most complex private rescue operations carried out for Indian mountaineers in South America. The embassy's involvement speeds up the process, but it doesn't speed up the weather. The governments of India and Chile agree on a format for joint action. The Argentine side opens air corridors. Chilean authorities provide equipment and crews. On the 31st of March, on the 7th day after the disappearance, the first search helicopters finally take off from the territory of Chile and Argentina. Several aircraft go up at once. The crews come back to base several times without ever reaching the search zone. The weather over the massif stays heavy. Even pilots with serious mountain experience can't get close to Cruces Sur. Visibility is knocked down by wind and snow. Attempts are repeated every day, sometimes several times a day. Some flights end with brief windows over the slopes, others with a turnaround halfway there. In India, people follow this news live. Major channels run tickers across the bottom of the screen. Newspapers put the story on the front page. Thousands of messages of support pour into social media. Some of those people are learning Malli's name for the first time in these very days. For many, it's a shock. It turns out the country had a climber like that, and they didn't know. In the village of Gandhijana Sangam, the family lives in complete uncertainty. Malli's parents are no longer young. Brothers and sisters speak to journalists. They say brief lines. They wait. They try to hold on to hope. The local villagers gather near the house, bring food, take turns keeping watch. It's an old Indian village tradition, being together in the hard hours. Public pressure grows. By the 1st of April, the subject rises to the level of parliamentary appeals. Deputies from Andhra Pradesh demand the central government bring the foreign ministry in at full capacity. The Indian Foreign Ministry releases official statements about coordination with the authorities of Chile and Argentina. By the 2nd of April, hope that Malli will be found alive is almost gone. 9 days at an altitude above 6,000 meters in a snowstorm is nearly a verdict for any human being, even a record holder at his level. But until he is found, formally he is listed as missing. The formal status changes on the 3rd of April, 2015. On this day, the weather gives the searchers a short but clean window. A team under the command of Hernan Parajon goes up the massif and pushes through to the zone where Malli might have been in his last hours of contact. They move by the logic of the route and by the indirect data they've pieced together over the past days. At an altitude of about 5,900 meters, they spot a tent. At first, it's just a dark patch on the snow, then it takes on the familiar silhouette of a lightweight, high-altitude shelter. The tent is standing, not ripped down by the wind, tied down by all the rules. Next to the tent, the the search group finds the body of Malli Mastan Babu. From the position of the body and the gear, it's clear that he managed to put up the shelter and was beside it, not inside. The preliminary cause of death is hypothermia during the storm. That's what the doctors and Argentine rescuers will officially determine later. By all signs, on the 24th of March, after the last radio contact, Malli was hit by the weather system on his descent. At exactly what moment it happened will remain without a final answer. One thing is clear, he managed to get the tent up. That in itself is a result of a high class. After that begins what experienced climbers call a fight at the last line. Alone, in a storm, at 5,900 meters with no communication, he tries to stay warm. At such altitude and in such wind, the felt temperature is like -40 and below. According to one version, he tried to step outside to look around or give a signal. According to another, he stayed in the tent. The search group marks the coordinates of the point. They take the necessary photos and notes. By protocol, in such a situation, you can't move fast. For a full evacuation, you need manpower and a clean weather window. Neither is available in full that day. They begin to prepare the body for descent and size up the route. The storm could come back any moment. The storm comes back quickly, exactly as the meteorologist predicted. That same day, the 3rd of April, the search group manages to lower the body to an altitude of about 5,000 meters. That's hundreds of meters of descent, covered on ropes, in wind and reduced visibility. Every 10 meters is hard won. They work in multiple rope teams, belaying each other down the chain. Closer to evening, the weather turns for good. There's no visibility. The wind climbs to storm values. Continuing the work is impossible. The group makes the only decision that's correct in this situation. They leave the body on the slope, secure it in place, and retreat to base camp. It's a heavy moment. The very people who had followed Malli for nearly 2 weeks are forced to leave without him, leaving him up there for one more night. The night at base camp passes quietly. In the morning, on the 4th of April, the group goes back up. The weather is a bit calmer. This time they manage to bring the body all the way down to base camp. From there, it's carried further down into the inhabited zone. The nearest large city is Tucumán in northern Argentina. That's where Malli Mastan Babu is flown out on air transport and where all the necessary paperwork is completed. The evacuation work takes almost a week after the discovery. It involves Argentine and Chilean rescuers, Indian diplomatic services, staff of the embassy in Santiago, private climbers, meteorologists. At some stage, a group of Indian mountaineers, who flew in specifically from their country to accompany the body, joins the operation. Through all these days, the news in India keeps running. Reports from Tucumán air on the main channels. Live crosses are held at the embassy. They show how the paperwork is being handed over, how international procedures are being coordinated. For the Indian viewer, it becomes a long and heavy goodbye to a living legend. At some moment, a phrase is heard on air for the first time: Malli Mastan Babu is coming home. Home to a country that, during his life, never quite managed to grasp his scale. A few days later, the body of Malli Mastan Babu returns to India. The plane lands in Delhi, then the casket is sent on to Andhra Pradesh. The last point of the route is his home village, Gandhi Jana Sangam, near Nellore, the very village from which a teenager once left for military school and never lived in again on a permanent basis. Thousands of people come out for the farewell. Local residents, former classmates, students from the Sangam district, mountaineers, state officials. The streets can't hold everyone who shows up. A column with flowers and flags stretches toward the house. For a small rural settlement, this is a historic event. For the first time in a long while, press crews from every major channel in the country come here. Several Indian states declare a day of mourning. At Sainik School in Korakonda, where Malli as a boy used to walk past the statue of Lieutenant Rao, a memorial assembly is held. The school now has 2 graduates who never came back from the mountains. The Indian Army sends the family an official condolence. The Indian Embassy in Chile publishes a mourning statement, calling Malli the pride of the country. IIM Calcutta opens a memorial page for the alumnus. It lists a timeline of his ascents, photos from expeditions, and recollections of classmates. The Adventure Club, founded by him in 2003, announces that it will bear his name. Lectures and memorial evenings are held in different cities across India. At the same time, a difficult question rises in the press. Journalists from Outlook India, Deccan Chronicle, and other outlets publish articles around one common idea. Why didn't the state recognize Malli Mastan Babu during his lifetime? He had world records. He was the first South Asian on the 7 summits. He was a climber on 5 of the highest 8,000ers in the world. But an honor at the Padma level was never awarded to him. In the Parliament of Andhra Pradesh, the topic is brought up for discussion. Some members demand the award be granted posthumously. The country is still looking for an answer to this question. The question of the state honor is only one of those that remains unanswered. Cruces never becomes part of Malli's completed list. The final peaks of the Andes from his project remain an unclosed target. He was planning to close this part and return home by the end of March. Instead, he stays on the mountain for one more week and comes back in a different way. His world record on the 7 summits is eventually broken by another climber. It's a natural thing. Speed records in the mountains don't hold for long. But Malli's record inside the record, 7 summits each taken on a different day of the week, has never been broken. In mountaineering reference books, it still stands as its own separate line. His route across the Himalayas, the 75-day traverse from Everest to Kanchenjunga, is studied by young Indian climbers. This work has become one of the key references for those who want to go into high-altitude trekking without commercial expeditions. In Indian clubs, his name is placed alongside those of the country's first ascensionists. At Sainik School in Korukonda, another monument has appeared. Now, next to the statue of Lieutenant Uday Bhaskar Rao, who died in 1985 on Everest, stands a memorial to another graduate, Malli Mastan Babu. The circle closes. The same boy who walked past the statue as a child and asked himself who that was, becomes the answer to the same question for new generations of students. The Tres Cruces Massif gave back the body, but didn't hand over the answers. It's unknown how much time Malli held on at 5,900 meters inside the tent. It's unknown whether he reached the summit before starting down. It's unknown how conditions at that altitude changed over those 24 hours. The only thing that is known is that he remained alone at that height. This part of the story, the mountain keeps to itself. For India, what remains is a name, the numbers, the routes, and a long, still open conversation about how a country treats its heroes while they are alive. On the 26th of May, 2019, in the Indian Himalayas, at an altitude of 5,400 meters, 8 climbers are preparing for a first ascent of an unnamed peak, 6,477 meters tall. They are led by Martin Moran, a British legend, the man who walked all 277 Munros in a single winter, the author of classic books, the so-called Guru of Garhwal. The evening before, he checks in over the radio in a calm voice. Everything is going to plan. A few hours later, the connection cuts out forever. All that remains on the slope is an avalanche scar hundreds of meters long. 7 bodies will be found a month later. The 8th will never be found. And a small GoPro will preserve a minute and a half of final footage, a fragment that becomes the central piece of evidence in the disaster. Martin Moran is born on the 19th of February, 1955, in Tyneside, in the northeast of England. This is a tough industrial region with shipyards, the River Tyne, and a low gray sky that presses the houses into the earth for most of the year. But just a few dozen miles west of Newcastle, the land rises quickly into heather hills and the mountains of northern England. That is where Martin's parents take him on walks as a small child. And that is where he first feels that strange, quiet sense of rightness in the presence of huge empty spaces. At school, he is diligent, focused, patient. Teachers note his mathematical mind and a rare eye for detail. So no one is surprised when Martin gets into the University of Cambridge, one of the 2 leading universities in Britain, and chooses to study geography there. He graduates from Cambridge with honors and walks down the well-trodden path that any sensible English family would have picked for him at that age. He qualifies as a chartered accountant, a serious, respectable, well-paid profession. But the real Moran, in those years, lives not in numbers but on weekends. Every Friday evening he closes the office, gets in his car, and drives north. A few hours on the motorway, across the Scottish border, and around him is the highlands, empty valleys, heather slopes, the huge domed summits of the Munros. On Saturday and Sunday, Martin walks them to exhaustion, in any weather, alone or with friends from climbing clubs. On Monday morning, he is back at his desk in a suit, and he realizes he is thinking only about the next trip out. The contrast between spreadsheets and ridgelines grows sharper. By the age of 30, he makes a decision that many of his colleagues and relatives consider insane. Moran leaves accountancy for good. He chooses a path where there is no fixed salary, no insurance against bad weather, and no guarantees at all. He chooses a path with no guarantees, and the very first undertaking becomes a test of endurance. On the 21st of December, 1984, during the shortest days of the year, Moran launches a project that will later enter the history of Scottish mountaineering. His goal sounds almost absurd: to climb all 277 Scottish summits over 900 meters in a single winter, without breaking for a rest at home. In Britain, these summits are called Munros, and before Moran, no one had ever done them in winter in one continuous push. Winter in the Scottish Highlands is short on daylight and long on suffering. Temperatures rarely drop to true Siberian levels, but the wind and damp strike harder than any frost. Moran moves in polar darkness with a headlamp, through storms, along iced-over ridges where narrow paths vanish under wind-blown cornices. Each day, a new summit or two, often without a trail, guided only by compass and map. He goes alone or with short-term partners, and almost every evening he comes back down to the car. Throughout the entire route, his wife Joy is with him. She follows him along the highland roads, meets him on the passes with hot soup, moves the base from one valley to another, watches the weather forecasts, helps plan the approaches. Without her, the project would have been impossible. In a Scottish winter, moving alone through the mountains without a reliable support person turns into a lottery. Day after day, in blizzards and fog, Moran ticks off summit after summit. When his strength runs out, he sleeps for a day and goes again. On the 13th of March, 1985, 83 days after starting, he climbs his final Munro, 277 peaks in a single winter expedition. The press speaks about him for the first time as a man who cannot be stopped, and that reputation will stay with him until the end. A reputation as a man who cannot be stopped arrives right on time. In that same year, 1985, Moran passes his final exams and earns the British Mountain Guide certificate. That badge is handed out to very few in Britain. To earn it, you have to prove your qualifications for years, on rock, ice, in the Alps, and in the high Himalayas. The board looks hard not just at technique, but at the ability to make decisions under pressure. By the age of 30, Moran is part of a narrow circle of British professional guides. He quickly understands that this status has to be turned into his own school, not sold by the hour. Together with Joy, he moves from Tyneside to the northwest of Scotland to Loch Carron, a tiny village on the shore of a sea loch, surrounded on all sides by mountains. There are no ski resorts here, no tourist storefronts, only wind, sheep, stone walls, and long valleys running deep into the highlands. In that quiet, they found a company called Moran Mountain. It is at once a climbing school and a guiding service, working year-round. A small house at the foot of a mountain becomes the base. Clients gather in the kitchen, ropes and crampons dry in the shed. Lectures on avalanche safety are held in the living room in the evenings. Moran personally runs almost every course. In summer, he takes clients to the Alps. Bases in Argentière in France and in Avalanche in Switzerland become second homes for the family. There, the groups work the classic routes of the Mont Blanc Massif and the Pennine Alps. In winter, everyone comes back to Scotland. Ice, wind, short daylight hours, tough technique. Over 20 years, hundreds of students from around the world pass through Moran's hands, from American bankers to Indian military climbers. Gradually, the children join the business. Hazel and Alex grow up on these courses, first as helpers, then as instructors. Moran Mountain becomes a family enterprise in the fullest sense, with a shared kitchen, shared clients, and a shared rhythm of life tied to weather windows in the mountains. Remarkably, the rhythm of the family business does not dull his own drive. On the contrary, it feeds it. Moran does not just guide others. He opens routes that were not on the map before him. Over his career, he puts up more than 100 new winter lines in the Scottish mountains. That is a staggering number by the standards of any climbing biography. Each line is hours of work on ice, in fog, with an unknown outcome. Among his routes, one that stands out is Reach for the Sky, a line climbed in 1989 on the face of Fuar Thole in the Western Highlands. It immediately enters the anthology of Scottish winter climbing as a model of dense technical climbing. In 1993, he climbs Bain H with a partner on an even harder line at a high grade of difficulty. In the Scottish scene, these lines remain test pieces for new generations for decades. That same year, 1993, brings him a major alpine project. Together with a partner, Moran completes a continuous traverse of all the Alpine 4000ers. These summits are scattered from French Savoy to Swiss Valais and Italian Gran Paradiso. The difficulty is not just in the climbing. The pair moves between peaks entirely under their own power, on foot and on skis, without using motorized transport. The project takes weeks and becomes one of the benchmark alpine marathons of the decade. In parallel, Moran writes books. He does it with the same patience he once applied to accounting reports. In 1986, The Munros in Winter comes out, a documentary account of his Winter Munro Round, which becomes a must-have for British winter walkers. In 1988, he publishes Scotland's Winter Mountains, The Challenges and the Skills, a methodical textbook on working in Scottish winter terrain. Later, he also writes an autobiography, Higher Ground, an honest, unpolished account of the life of a mountain guide. In it, he does not idealize the profession, and he does not hide the fact that mountains sometimes take more from a guide than they give. The line that mountains sometimes take more from a guide than they give is delivered without pathos in his autobiography. But at some point in the 1990s, it is the mountains that open a new dimension for him. Moran starts traveling regularly to the Indian Himalayas, and this region never lets him go again. He is especially drawn to Garhwal, a huge bowl of summits in northern India, between the Nepalese and Pakistani borders. Garhwal is a special place. There is almost none of the commercial infrastructure you see in Nepalese Khumbu. No crowds at base camps, no restaurants on the trails, no standard tricks with oxygen suppliers. Every expedition demands a long approach, its own logistics, direct arrangements with locals. That is exactly the style that suits Moran. All his life, he disliked conveyor belt climbing. He starts taking clients there, but he goes far beyond standard treks. In 1995, together with partners, he makes a first ascent of the south face of Nanda Devi, a summit 6,861 meters tall. It is a serious Himalayan milestone. In the year 2000, he becomes the first to climb the west ridge of Nilkanth, a summit 6,596 meters high. In Hindu tradition, Nilkanth is considered sacred, and such an ascent automatically draws the attention of the local press. By 2016, he has 14 first ascents in the Indian Himalayas to his name. That is a rare achievement for a European guide. Usually such people have 1 or 2 first ascents in a career, not a dozen and a half. Local climbing communities start calling Moran the guru of Garhwal mountaineering. Unlike many commercial bosses, he almost never sits in base camp while sending clients up ahead with Sherpas. He leads from the front, checking each step personally. India becomes a second home for him. Every season he comes back, often with the same clients who have trusted him for years. And in the end, this is the land from which he will never return home. The final season of his biography is the spring of 2019. By May, Moran is preparing a large expedition to Nanda Devi East, a summit 7,434 meters tall, one of the hardest 7,000ers in India. It is a wild, remote mountain whose pyramid silhouette is visible from afar and stays with anyone who has ever been to Garhwal. There are no easy approaches, no commercial shelters, only long walk-ins through valleys, glaciers, and moraines. The team is a colorful international group, 12 people if you count the local high-altitude porters. The core is 8 foreign and Indian climbers, 4 British, 2 Americans, an Australian, and an Indian liaison officer. Several porters from local villages are added. Among the clients is university lecturer Richard Payne of the University of York, an experienced mountain walker who has dreamed of a 7,000er for years. Alongside him are John McLaren and Rupert Buell, also British, with serious climbing resumes. From the United States come Anthony Sudacum and Ronald Beimel. The Australian's name is Ruth McCants. The Indian liaison officer is Chetan Pandey, an experienced high-altitude guide. According to the plan, the expedition first moves up the glaciers to base camp, then makes several acclimatization pushes, and only then attempts the main summit. A classic scheme, one Moran has run dozens of times. Base camp is set in a harsh valley under the walls of Nanda Devi, at an altitude a little over 4,000 meters. It is cold here even in May, but the air is still relatively thick, and the body has time to adjust to the load. All participants have climbing experience. Some have been climbing with Moran for years, know his habits, the way he runs a group, his calm voice on the radio. He has a reputation as a tough but predictable leader. He does not like improvisation. He always explains the plan in advance and keeps his word. On the 22nd of May, 2019, the team is ready to move up to the acclimatization altitudes. Base camp is in place, tents are pitched, equipment is checked. A few days of work higher up lie ahead. Only a handful of days remain before the tragedy. Only a handful of days remain before the tragedy. And in those days, Moran makes a decision that will later become the key turning point of the whole story. For high-altitude climbing, the decision is entirely standard. The group splits in two. 4 participants stay on the main Nanda Devi East route, fixing ropes, working the lower part of the wall, preparing the high camps for the later summit push. The remaining 8 go on an acclimatization climb. For the acclimatization goal, Moran picks an unusual target. Instead of simply climbing to the 6,000-meter mark and coming back, he plans a first ascent of a neighboring unnamed peak, 6,477 meters high. It is a mountain no one has climbed before. For the group, such an ascent is a double win, acclimatization, and a rare climbing trophy in the form of a first ascent. The team of 8 is led personally by Moran. Next to him is the Indian liaison officer and guide Chetan Pandey, a man who knows the Garhwal region as well as any European. In the group are the British climbers John McLaren, Rupert Buell, and Richard Payne, the Americans Anthony Sudicum and Ronald Beimel, the Australian Ruth McCants. It is a tight international group where everyone has their own experience, but all are ready to follow a single leader. The plan on paper is clear and logical. The group climbs to a high camp at 5,400 meters, spends the night there, sets out for the summit push early in the morning, traverses the ridge, tops out on summit 6477, and descends. Just over a day of active work is allotted for all of this. After returning to base camp, the team will have a few days to recover, and then they will join the first 4 for the push on the main objective. On the 25th of May, the group climbs up to the high camp. The tents are pitched on a snow shelf at roughly 5,400 meters, in a spot sheltered from the wind. At this altitude, the lack of air is already noticeable, but all 8 feel fine. The weather is holding, the snow is stable, the morning forecast looks good. The weather is holding, the morning forecast looks good, and on the evening of the 25th of May, Moran calls base camp on the radio. The radio check runs on its usual schedule. Moran reports briefly and to the point. Tents at 5,400 meters. All 8 people feel normal. Condition is good. No signs of altitude sickness in anyone. The snow on the ridge has firmed up. The forecast is stable. Moran confirms that in the morning of the 26th of May, the group will set out for the unnamed summit, 6477. It is a standard high-altitude scheme. The group will get up long before dawn, still in full darkness. By headlamp, they will gather their gear, have breakfast of hot tea with dry rations. Then, roped up, they will move on to the ridge that leads to the summit. The working plan is a traverse along a narrow snow rib, without complicated technical sections. By Moran's calculations, the group should top out by midday and be back at camp before dark. Those who speak with him that evening on the radio all note the same thing afterwards. Moran sounds composed, confident, with no hint of worry at all. There is no tiredness in his voice, no hesitation. It is the calm working tone of a man who knows exactly what he is doing and is not leading a group at this pace for the first time. At base camp, no one is expecting anything unusual. The mountain is in place, the weather is stable, the plan is tried and logical. The leader is on the radio, the camp is set up correctly, the group is disciplined. If everything goes to plan, the next radio call will be from the summit or on the descent. High up, the team settles down to sleep. The tents are zipped shut, stoves are off, sleeping bags are pulled up to the chin. Ahead lies a short night and an intense day. No one knows that this evening radio check is the last in the life of Martin Moran. It is the last time his voice will be heard alive. From that moment, the connection with the eight breaks forever. The connection with the eight breaks forever. But that will be understood later. Meanwhile, inside the group itself, among the backpacks and gear, a small GoPro is running. One of the participants is filming stages of the climb for a personal archive. That camera will be found by rescuers among the bodies many weeks later, and the memory card inside will somehow survive. Investigators will recover a minute and a half of footage from it, a short video diary of the group's final hours. The first fragment is shot at night. The frame is dark, lit only by headlamps. People are checking gear, tightening pack straps, putting on crampons. Faces are hidden under hoods and masks. Short businesslike phrases are heard. The camera slowly turns toward the horizon. In the east, above the enormous bowl of Himalayan ridges, a cold, dry dawn is rising. The sky is paling. The silhouettes of distant summits emerge from the gray dark. There is nothing tragic in this shot. An ordinary climbing morning. The second fragment is shot in bright light. The camera looks forward. 7 climbers are walking in a chain, one after another, along a narrow snow ridge. They are roped together in short teams, moving at a measured, familiar high-altitude pace. Heavy breathing is audible. At such altitude, even a step requires effort. The wind whistles, the crust crunches loudly under the crampons. Occasionally, the edge of an ice axe or the corner of a backpack catches the frame. The ridge beneath them is a classic snow cornice. On one side, a gentle snow slope; on the other, a deep drop. Fresh wind-blown bulges are visible on the cornice, but nothing abnormal by the standards of the region. There is no panic in the frame, no bad signs, no fuss. It is an ordinary working moment of a high-altitude climb, shot a few minutes before everything ceases to exist. This very ridge, in a very short time, becomes the breaking point of the whole story. The camera does not know it yet. The camera does not know it yet, but the ridge is already working against the group. What exactly happens in the next few seconds will be pieced together later by scientists and rescuers from indirect data, from the shape of the avalanche debris, from the positions of the bodies, from the marks on the remaining snow, and from the GoPro footage itself. The snow cornice, along which the line of climbers is moving, collapses. Most likely it loses stability under the group's own weight. Cubic meters of compacted snow break off the ridge as a single block. When the cornice collapses, it pulls the entire slope beneath it along. The mass of snow and ice triggers a large avalanche rolling down the couloir. 8 people, tied together by ropes, are flying down, along with a wall of snow. At that altitude and at that speed, there is simply no time to react. Neither an ice axe driven into the slope nor well-trained reflexes can help. An avalanche of broken snowmass leaves no chance for self-rescue. None of the 8 manages to use standard techniques. No one pulls an avalanche beacon hoping to be found. No one activates an emergency transmitter. The avalanche carries the entire group down and buries them at different elevations on the slope. The ropes that tied the people together at first act as a common safety line, then become the reason why the bodies end up relatively close to one another, scattered along a band several hundred meters long. At base camp, no one knows yet. The next radio check is still hours away. The mountain cuts the 8 off from the world in a single second. All that remains on the slope is a fresh avalanche scar running from the ridge down to the glaciers. The snow dust settles, the wind covers the tracks. Silence returns to the place where the group had just been working. The nature of this tragedy lies precisely in how quickly and silently everything happens. There is no connection, and there will be no more. The group has ceased to exist as a group. And at base camp level, the usual housekeeping continues. The cook is heating tea, someone is patching a tent. At base camp, the usual housekeeping continues. On the evening of the 26th of May, the scheduled radio check comes around. Moran does not call in. This is unusual. He has always been punctual on the radio. But not yet a catastrophe. Many things happen at altitude. Problems with the radio, strong wind, batteries failing in the cold, the signal lost behind a ridge. Base's first reaction is to wait for the next window. Another day passes. The airwaves stay silent. The group does not check in again. The next day the situation repeats. Now it becomes clear. It is not the radio and not a dead battery. The remaining 4 on the main Nanda Devi East route decide to climb along the route of the 8 and search for them on their own. It is the only option while the authorities are not yet involved. The climbers themselves are the closest to the possible location. The four set out upward along the track planned by Moran. They head for the high camp where the 8 were supposed to spend the night, and then on to the ridge where the 8 were to move out the morning of the 26th of May. The climb takes time and strength because their acclimatization is not complete. They move carefully, with pauses, checking landmarks. On the slope beneath the ridge, a picture opens to them that cannot be mistaken for anything else. They see a fresh, huge avalanche discharge, a scar several hundred meters long, running from the ridge downward. No tents, no traces of the group, no answering signals. Only churned snow, debris from the slope, and chunks of ice that have come down recently. It becomes clear, a large disaster has happened, and most likely without survivors. At such altitude, with such a volume of avalanche, and with the time that has passed since the collapse, there is no chance. The four record the coordinates, take photos, and turn back down to pass the coordinates to the authorities. On the 31st of May, the alarm is officially raised. Indian rescue forces are dispatched to the Nanda Devi region. The news goes out to London, Washington, Canberra, to the families of the 8 missing climbers. The news goes to the families, and at the same time, the state machine starts up. The first to step in is the Indo-Tibetan Border Police, the ITBP, a specialized unit with experience in high-altitude operations in this very region. The ITBP has helicopters, trained pilots, climbing teams. Reconnaissance aircraft rise over the Nanda Devi area. Weather in the pre-monsoon period is capricious. In the morning, there can be a clear sky. By midday, there is fog and snow showers. Pilots work in narrow windows between storms. On the 3rd of June, the aerial search finds the result everyone had been dreading. 5 bodies are visible in the snow, at different points along the avalanche runout. They lie at different elevations on the slope, some partly buried by snow. The positions show that the group was dragged a significant distance down the couloir. The altitude, weather, and turbulence do not allow the helicopters to land and evacuate the bodies immediately. The helicopters record the coordinates, take photos, and return to the airfield. It becomes clear. A ground rescue team is needed, one that will reach the site and prepare the bodies for evacuation. A team of ITBP rescuers is formed in Munsiari, the nearest large village on the Kumaon side. From there, a foot and mountain approach to the Nanda Devi East region begins. The journey takes days. Mountain trails are washed out by spring meltwater. The snow on the upper sections is still at winter thickness, and sometimes it breaks into deep hollows. Only on the 23rd of June, almost a month after the cornice collapse, does the ground team finally reach the site of the tragedy. On the slope and in the lower fields of the avalanche runout, the rescuers find 7 of the 8 bodies. They are scattered along a band, partly frozen into the consolidated ice. The work has to be done with crampons and shovels, carefully, to avoid damaging the bodies or triggering another slide. The 8th body cannot be found. It is hidden by a deep mass of avalanche debris that has consolidated over the weeks. Despite a thorough sweep of the area, the last member of the team cannot be located. The last member of the team cannot be located, but the others must be evacuated urgently. The monsoon is on the rescuers' heels. In early July, the ITBP helicopters return to the search point. The pilots work in extreme conditions: thin air, complex turbulence on the slope, short windows of good weather. Over several flights, they manage to lift 7 bodies of dead climbers on board and bring them down to Munsiari. Among the personal belongings of the group collected on the slope, the rescuers find a broken GoPro. The camera is badly damaged, the casing cracked, but the memory card has survived. That card is what will later allow the minute and a half of footage to be recovered: the nighttime preparations by headlamp, the dawn over the Himalayas, and the chain of people walking along the ridge. The card becomes the main physical source about the last hours of the team. The 8th body remains on the slope. Monsoon storms close the search window. The valleys are flooded by rain. The upper sections are buried under fresh snow. Flying helicopters into the area becomes impossible. The Indian authorities officially suspend the operation until the next season. The family of the 8th missing climber receives the news that all climbers' relatives dread. The body has not been found, and the search will not resume anytime soon. Later, the search never really resumes in full. The mountain will not give up the last one. For his family, Nanda Devi becomes a grave without an address, one you cannot visit, cannot bring flowers to, cannot even simply stand beside. The 7 bodies lifted out in July are sent home. The British return to England, the Americans to the United States, the Australian is taken to Australia, the Indian guide to his family. The 8th stays where he halted his journey together with the others, on the slope of an unnamed summit that no one had climbed before them. On the slope of an unnamed summit, one of the 8 remains, but the whole world already knows about the tragedy. News of Martin Moran's death travels through the British climbing community within hours. Phones at Moran Mountain are ringing off the hook with journalists, former clients, colleagues from British mountain guides. In tiny Loch Carron, where everyone knows everyone, neighbors, clients, and friends gather at the family's home. At the University of York, a memorial evening is held in honor of Dr. Richard Payne. Research colleagues speak about what kind of teacher he was, what topics he worked on, what kind of walker he was across the English moors. American newspapers publish obituaries of Anthony Sudicum and Ronald Beimel. Australian media tell the story of Ruth McCants, an experienced sportswoman who had been preparing for a Himalayan season for years. In India, the family of Chitan Pandey receives words of condolence from the climbing communities of the entire state of Uttarakhand. British newspapers come out with long features on the guru of Garhwal. Journalists call Moran one of the most technically skilled, disciplined, and respected mountain guides of his generation. They retell his biography in detail: the Winter Munro Round of 1985, Moran Mountain, the Alpine Traverses, the 14 first ascents in the Himalayas. This balance between a modest Scottish village and the scale of the mountains is exactly what impresses the readers. The family publishes a short statement. The words are simple and without pathos. "We are deeply saddened, but he was where he loved to be." It sounds almost like an epitaph Moran himself could have written. After a pause, Moran Mountain announces that it will continue to operate under family management. Hazel and Alex take on the main directions, not letting the school and the client base fall apart. In memory of Martin Moran, the Martin Moran Foundation is created. The foundation helps young climbers from low-income families gain access to courses and equipment, exactly what novice guides had once lacked. The Martin Moran Foundation helps young climbers take their first steps, but that is only part of what he left behind. Moran has to his name more than 100 new winter routes in Scotland and 14 first ascents in the Indian Himalayas. His books are still being reprinted. The Munros, in winter in Scotland's winter mountains, remain reference points for British climbers, and the Moran mountain courses are broken down and adapted in other schools across Europe. The Indian Mountaineering Foundation carries out an internal review of the 2019 tragedy. The final report records the main cause: the descent of a large avalanche triggered by the collapse of a snow cornice on the ridge. The GoPro video recovered from the memory card confirms this version. The group was indeed moving along the cornice at the moment when it began to break apart. No alternative versions have appeared since. Nevertheless, open questions remain in the story. People argue about the index and exact altitude of that unnamed peak of 6,477 meters. The figure differs slightly in different sources. They also argue about whether the ridge route was objectively too risky for such a group, or whether the avalanche was a rare coincidence of conditions that could not have been predicted. Moran spent his whole life working on avalanche safety and lectured on this very subject, which makes the question especially painful. The 8th body is still never found. For the Himalayas, this is unfortunately the norm. Dozens of climbers from different eras do not return from these slopes. Nanda Devi is not the first time, and will not be the last, that this mountain takes people and keeps them in its cold archive. Martin Moran stays where he always wanted to be. In a brief posthumous interview, his wife Joyce says almost the same words as the family statement. He lived the life he chose himself, and he passed away in the mountains he loved until the last minute. The 3 stories in this collection end similarly. A world-class professional, a national legend of his country, a body that the mountain decided to keep for itself.